I'm demonstrating the Van Dieman's Underwater Blue Ringed Octopus High Saturation Fountain Pen ink. It's a wonderful ink that's very variable in tone, and it's from the Van Dieman's Underwater series. It's an ink that you could basically call an experimental ink, and I have to confess up front that I have not done justice to this ink on the two papers I chose to work with. I chose the Clairefontaine and the Fabriano watercolor paper. So I've used a writing paper, which I'm working on now, and I've also used a very high quality watercolor paper, and I put it on very heavy. Now at the moment my demonstration is still damp, and the ink, as we quite often know, will change, and when it's dry tomorrow it may look completely different. And I've finished this work off to a certain stage, and I will go back in and work some more on it in my next demonstration. So it's not a fully complete demonstration. I'll also be showing you how I make a temporary hand-bound art journal using watercolor papers and writing papers mixed. It's temporary in that I can undo it and reformat the book at any point. I don't have to be stuck with an image in it if I don't like the image, or if I like it a lot, I can take it out and frame it, or I could give it away or sell it. So you're not bound. If the way I make my art journals, they're completely undoable easily, to remove a section or to rearrange sections or even add extra pages. So I've made a 100-page art journal. Now, when I say art journal, I'm not talking fine art. I'm talking about everyday Illustrator diary. This is a journal to be used. Now what I've done there is I'd started writing and the paper was still a little bit too damp and the ink bled out. And I did that deliberately to show you it. So I wasn't stuck with it. I immediately went back in and added some more paint in the form of ink, and the water. Now, ink is usually made from dye. There are pigmented inks. Paint is usually made from pigment. So dyes are more fleeting than pigments. So ink is not really made for framing and putting up on the wall, because if it's made from dye, that dye will fade. It's, as I said, it's not archival quality. It's perfect for using journaling purposes and for writing in a book where the book's going to be closed and it's not going to be exposed to bright light. I'm finding the ink lovely to write with, and I'm talking about a day I spent where we had an evening at Lake Dalesford and we had a picnic tea there. It was lovely. I had my family there with me. So that's basically a diary entry. And I've done a bit of an illustration of the evening at Lake Dalesford. Not fine art, just a diary entry, a little bit of illustration for personal use. Now how I made the journal. I've been in my studio for about 7.5 months and I'm really happy here. I've got a lovely 2-room studio, writing studio at the back overlooking my courtyard, and the art studio is out the front, which again has a lovely vista, lovely blossom trees coming into flower because it's springtime here, and I have roses and native plants out the front in flower. So I do love nature. So there's some lovely close walks full of flowers. So I'm getting ready for my spring art journal. I'm a little bit late because it's already spring here, but I'm making my own journal and I'm mixing high quality fountain pen friendly ink papers and very high quality Fabriano artist watercolor paper into this journal, and it's quite easy to make. And I started off by just using what I had. I didn't go out and buy anything special because that helps for me because I have stuff here. For having been a professional artist, I've got a lot of stuff laying around. But to buy the fountain pen friendly journal that I wanted that would have taken watercolor work as well as the fountain pen, I was looking at spending close to $100, and that was just for one journal. I found that if I bought a full size A1 size sheet of watercolor paper and I folded it into about 16 folds and pulled that apart, just having a couple of folds backwards and forwards and then pulling it apart at the seam, getting a nice torn edge, and then I just finding from notebooks that I already owned that had fountain pen friendly paper and pulling it out, roughly A5 size, and I've gone with the Japanese idea that beauty is not in perfection, that you don't, I'm not trying to make a precision book like one that you might buy that's formed by machine. I'm going for a handmade quality to it. I've also, I like the aesthetics of being an artist, being original. To me, craft is sort of copying and learning a procedure which you repeat and repeat. That works fine if you're knitting a jumper. But if you're creating as an artist, you don't necessarily have to look up a formula and copy that. Certainly there are some wonderful tutorials out there, and I've got books on how to make a handmade book, but I just went instinctively, intuitively. And I have made this handmade book very changeable. I'm not bound by having put hours and hours and hours into the making of this book so that it's so precious that I'm scared to use it. I have made this book very loosely. It's loosely tied, and let's say I did a piece that a member of the family or a client even loved and wanted to own, or if I decided I wanted to sell a piece or give it away, I can unbound this book very easily and take that piece out. I might want to frame a piece and put it on my own wall. So it's not the sort of book that cannot be manipulated. Let's say I ruined a piece. But certainly I could paste something over it, but I could also undo the book and remove that section. So this is a very loosely bound book. It's practical in that I can pick it up and handle it as a book, but it's also practical in that it's changeable. It will represent my work for about 3 months because there's over 100 pages, a mixture of fountain pen friendly pages, ideal for writing, and there's a mixture of pages that are ideal for painting with. I've used 2 different grades of watercolor paper. I've used the very heaviest, it's almost as heavy as card, and that would take a lot of water. That would be ideal if I was doing acrylic painting, a lot of water or a really wet wash. And I've used the lighter weight, less expensive watercolor paper, which will be great for doing line and wash work, starting with pen and ink, in my fountain pens or my dip pens, and then finishing off with just very light washes. So I've used a range of the sort of papers that I want to use. So when you make your own journal, you can mix those papers up to suit what you like. If you go to the description and also to the comments, you'll see a list of all the different YouTube channels I have and each of the art mediums that I specialise in each of those channels. And I would love you to choose the ones that suit you and support me. That will encourage me to keep putting out tutorials in those. I also have a mixed medium art journaling channel. This is like an evening in my studio, telling you about it the next day, what I had been doing. So what I've created is a fully customizable handmade book, and I will be working in this book in a range of different art mediums, each one being shown in its own unique art channel here on YouTube that you can subscribe to. The links will be in the description. As you can see, the Blue Ringed Octopus ink has ghosted through on the thin writing paper. Also, I didn't get a really good sheen effect on this paper. I believe if I'd used a higher quality paper, I would have. I've enjoyed working with it on the watercolor paper, but again, I didn't get the sheen and I haven't got the colour breakup that I expected to. I initially intended to only use the ink on the areas where the fish and coral haven't been underpainted, but when I didn't get a breaking up of colour, I was hoping to get some red breaking through the blue, so I went haywire and I coated the paper much more heavily, and of course it bled right through the paper, so I did both sides. And what I'm going to do with that, having got two sides of a heavy quality watercolour paper heavily coated in the blue ink, the Van Dieman's Inks Blue Ringed Octopus ink paper, I'm going to go back in and do another demonstration onto those papers, and that will be coming up shortly in the next demonstrations. So if you want to see those demonstrations, subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you know when the next video comes up. So these are basically an underpainting now for the next artworks, and hopefully I'll get more special effects showing from this ink in my next demonstration.